and be heard.
Good morning and welcome to Bettina's Buzz on SantaCruzVoice.com. I'm Bettina McBee, and with me in studio, I have a special guest this morning, Frank Schellace. Good morning, Frank.
Good morning.
Welcome
Hello.
to Bettina's Buzz.
Happy to be here.
I'm great. It's great to have you here, and I'm really excited because Frank is a beekeeper. I have a beekeeper on Bettina's Buzz. I'm thrilled. Tell us about yourself, Frank.
So, yes, I'm a beekeeper. I've been beekeeping for about 5 years now. I actually got into beekeeping via sculpture. So I wanted to make a sculpture with live bees, and my friend said, oh, you should go to the community garden. They keep bees there. They have
You wanted to make a sculpture of bees?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with live bees inside of it.
That's an interesting concept. And listeners, I met Frank at MPC in Gary's class. Actually, he was there visiting Nicholas, as you told me. But it was Gary's 3D technology class at MPC, which I am a student of. Great class. And Nicholas told me he brought up bees, and of course my ears got big, and I said, Nicholas, please introduce me to the beekeeper. So tell our listeners, Frank, you were there for the class for?
Yes, the class was making water feeders for the bees so they could come and collect water, which is an important component of the hive. And so he had invited me to come and look at their designs, and all of them were so diverse. You know, everyone had their own kind of personal take on it. It was really cool to see.
So, and again, tell us again about sculpting the bees. That's extremely interesting to me. So,
Yeah, I wanted to make a sculpture with the bees inside of it because my grandfather had this car when I was a kid. It was a 1979 Plymouth Volare.
what color was it?
It was blue.
Blue.
Which is, it's funny that you ask because as kids we didn't know like car names or makes or anything, so we always just called it the blue car. You know, it was like one of those cars where the seats were leather and would heat up, so you get in and it would just kind of burn.
Have a nice, but did it have that nice smell to it too?
Yeah.
That leather smell?
Yeah, it was nice. So he had this car, and a few years ago, I'd called my dad, and I was like, whatever happened to the blue car? And he said, it got so full of bees that we had to have it towed. And I was like,
Full of bees?
full of bees, yeah. I said, well, that's really, really weird. Do you know where it ended up? And he said, no, but I know that the guy got stung a lot.
Did you find out how the car got full of bees?
I didn't. So now that I've been beekeeping for about 5 years, I feel like it was wasps that were in there.
And not actually bees.
Not actually bees.
And there's a big difference between the two.
Yeah,
Correct?
correct. Yeah. Because bees, you know, they're very particular about the volume of their home. Like, they're very particular about where they want to be, right? Where they want to live, where their next home is. So I don't think that car, it just seems like it would be too big, right? And wasps.
Not quite their model.
Not quite their maker model,
More of
no.
a wasp type car.
Yeah, exactly. It was waspy. Yeah.
Did you finish your sculpture of the bees?
I haven't yet. I have made kind of prototypes, which has been fun, you know, because I've been making them based on what I've been learning about the bees. And hopefully I will make a finished one within the next year to 2 years, something like that. Yeah.
So your interest of bees started with the car, and then what happened?
I got to the hives, and it was at Kew Gardens Community Farm, which is a community garden in Flatbush, Brooklyn. And they were doing kind of a co-learning experience with the bees where we were reading a book called Honeybee Democracy.
Honeybee Democracy?
Yeah, which is a book that I really would suggest to people. It's fascinating, and it's approachable the way that it's written. But it was about kind of how the bees are built around this kind of consensus model for finding new homes. And a lot of people know about the waggle dance.
I don't know about the
Okay.
waggle dance. Okay. Please tell me.
Right, so the waggle dance is the way that the bees communicate where they're going to go next, right? So they live in one hive, and then when the colony grows enough to reproduce, the queen and 40 to 50% of the hive will go find a new home, and the original hive, they'll raise a new queen. And so that's like a colony level reproduction. That's how the superorganism reproduces. But the way that they do that is fascinating because there will be scout bees that are going out and they're looking for new homes, the next best place to go. And they'll come back and they do this dance called the waggle dance. And it's like they're oriented to the sun, so they know kind of north, south, east, west, whatever. And they kind of like spin around and they wiggle. They waggle their abdomens, their butts, as people say. And it creates this kind of dance battle where different scouts have different homes that they like, and they come back and they do this dance to tell the other bees about it. And it becomes, again, this kind of dance battle.
Dance contest?
Yeah.
To relocate to the home they picked?
Exactly. They say, I want to go to this one. This one's great. And the other one's lobbying for this one. This one's great. This one's a tree stump about, I don't know, a mile from here, 15 feet in the air. And it's whatever, 40 a gallon of, I don't remember the exact, capacity that they want. But, yeah, so they do this. And then over time, you kind of start to see bees mimicking the waggle of one particular bee, and they come to a consensus that that one is the best one to go to.
Oh, so it's like one waggling, and then the other bees will start getting into the groove of that waggle, and if everybody waggles, it's off to go. They go, right? That is so interesting.
Yeah. So we were kind of trying to, I don't know, we were mimicking this kind of consensus building exercise of like, how do we make decisions and how do we work together and, work together through consensus and democracy. And I found that fascinating. And, ever since then, I've found more and more to be fascinated with.
So bees work really well together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think they're really smart that they have a queen as opposed to a king.
Yeah.
That's one thing I really like about bee.
Yeah. They have a queen. And, right now in the hives, there are no males during this part of the season. So in my hives right now, 0 males.
And the female bees get along really well?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of studies dedicated, past and present now, or I guess more studies coming out to kind of like personalities of bees and their capacity to have personalities. One of the things that I like to think about is that foragers will actually take naps. So we think of like busy bees doing things all the time, flying around, pollinating. But actually, when kind of the meadow is exhausted, or if there's enough resources in the hives, other foragers will tell foragers to stop, and if they have nothing to do,
to take a nap.
Take a nap. Yeah.
So you don't think bees are always busy? They sound like they're always busy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that they have periods of being extremely busy, and that's probably most of the season, especially if they're kind of a first-year hive. And then if there's a nectar flow, as we like to say, if there's a lot in bloom, a lot of, available nectar and pollen and stuff like that, and they have enough in the hives, then they have the opportunity to rest, which is nice.
Well, yeah, that's nice, because we all need rest. I think even a busy bee needs rest. So you live in Marina.
Yes.
Like me. And again, we were talking about the drive this morning. It was a beautiful drive here to Santa Cruz. And you were mentioning this is one of the few times you've come to Santa Cruz.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we're very happy that you've made the journey to come to Santa Cruz, and now you have to come more often. It's a great place to come. But how long have you lived in Marina?
I've lived in Marina since September 5th, actually.
So that's not very long.
Not very long, no.
And you brought your bees with you?
So I wasn't able to bring bees. The bees that I have now, I got via a colony removal. So there was a colony in an AT&T box, like an electronic box, and I went and removed them and put them in a new hive.
Where did you go to remove them?
That was in Salinas.
Oh. So what, you ordered them and had them shipped to you? Is that what you mean?
No, these were unmanaged bees. So they had left their original home, and they had made a home in a box that's dedicated to AT&T's electronics or AT&T's wiring.
Oh, so you went and basically rescued the bees
Yeah.
from the AT&T wiring
Yeah.
and gave them a new home in Marina with you.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
How many bees do you have?
So right now I have 2 colonies, so that's like 2 boxes, and I'm going to combine them into one today, actually, when I go back to Marina. And there's, I would say, a couple thousand in there, maybe above 10,000. Yeah,
bees
within that colony. So the colony in the peak of the season, which we're not in right now, we're kind of winding down. But in the peak of the season, late May, early June, you can have like 40,000 bees in one hive.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So how do you manage so many bees? How do you control bees?
The good thing about bees is that they can mostly manage themselves.
Good thing.
Yeah. So, the way that we approach it is kind of soft intervention. Like, you're basically going in, you're doing a colony inspection, so you're, picking up frames.
And you're well protected.
Yeah, depending on the hive. So that is one thing. Once you get used to bees, then you can decide how much equipment you want to wear, because the equipment is great, the equipment is good, all the protective stuff keeps you safe. But we have been breeding bees for gentle behavior for a long time now. So a lot of the stock, as we say, of bees that you end up keeping are bred to be managed. So if you get gentle bees, you can
Domesticated bees.
Right, yeah. I mean, they've gotten to the point where they're essentially cattle, right? We're like bringing them around to pollinate big farms and, kind of using them for our agricultural purposes. And so in certain hives, I won't wear a lot of equipment. Some I won't wear any equipment. But you really have to kind of know the temperament, and you have to know the time of the season. So even in a colony where I feel comfortable not wearing equipment, let's say in May, by let's say August, I won't feel as comfortable not wearing equipment, because that's a time usually of less blooms. There's less of a nectar flow, so they are starting to feel a little bit more pressure, and yellow jackets will be trying to get into the hives. Oh. And so they'll be a little bit more agitated, and so that's when I'll put on the equipment.
Do they fight, bees and yellow jackets?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You'll see grappling matches right at the entrance of the hive.
Matches.
Yeah, it gets kind of, it feels personal sometimes. I'll go to the hive and I'll see yellow jackets and I get a little upset because I'm like, you're trying to mess with my bees, I want to protect them. But, the reality of keeping bees and the reality of the life of a bee is there is a lot of death involved, and that's just kind of nature,
What is the lifespan of a bee?
It depends on the season. So a lot of the stuff is seasonal. And so a bee will live 2 to 5 weeks in the spring and the early summer, or rather, let's say a month in the spring, 2 to 5 weeks in the summer, and then especially where I come from,
which is again
the Northeast, yeah. So where I was keeping them in Brooklyn, all the bees born between, let's say, like late August to November, their biology is changing so that instead of living a month or a couple of weeks, they're living for 6 months because they have to survive the winter.
That's still not very long, at least obviously by our standards.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's not very long at all. Do you name your bees?
Sometimes we name, yeah. Sometimes we name the queen, or we'll name the hives themselves. Like the hive is the wooden equipment, right? And then the colony is the bees themselves. And so to differentiate between the hives, sometimes we'll name them. especially in educational settings where there's only like 4 hives that we're dealing with. We'll name them so that people know what we're talking about when we're talking about management plans. The way that we've been naming them has been corresponding to beekeepers past, so beekeepers that went through our program and have moved on. So the hives will be pretty simple names like Sarah or Anne or Farah.
And the bee knows which hive is its hive?
Yeah. It's a really good question, though, too, because the worker, the forager, will know which hive to go to for a number of reasons. I mean, they orient themselves to the sun. They have a flight path. They're also orienting themselves to landmarks and specific kind of things that they see near the hive. But there is some drift, right? Inevitably, a bee might go to the wrong colony. And so one thing that we try to do is paint the hive bodies, try to paint them, paint a symbol on them, or, put something different next to one than the other so that they absolutely know. Yeah.
How many eyes do bees have?
That's a good question. I don't remember exactly how many eyes. They have the compound eye, right, which has, a ton of eyes on it. And then they have 3 ocelli, which are on kind of the top of their head. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like a motion sensor.
Oh, a motion sensor.
Yeah.
And what makes the queen bee stand out?
The queen bee is larger, and she does need to stand out because, we don't look for the queen every single time that we're going into the hive, but there are times where you want to see the queen for sure. And so she stands out one of 2 ways. She's physically larger. So if you don't have a queen that's marked, you just look for the big body, basically. And she'll be moving around the comb more slowly than the workers.
More regally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And she might have her retinue, which is workers.
And do the other bees kind of clear a little path as she comes by?
It's funny, though, because also bees, they just like walk all over each other.
I've seen that they don't mind.
Nope, they're just walking right on top of each other. You'll see bees emerging from cells, like newborn bees, essentially, and other bees are just walking right on top of them.
Right on top of them.
Yeah.
Okay, Frank, we're going to take a moment. I'm going to take a moment and play an ad, and we'll see what happens. We'll be right back here on Bettina's Voice on SantaCruzVoice.com on Bettina's Buzz.
Weeds when your yard could be generating hundreds or thousands of dollars. Learn more about the Ben Franklin Book of the Year winner, Metro Farm. Know how to run a business and only a little about farming? Read Metro Farm. Have a green thumb and not much understanding about business? Read Metro Farm. Find inspiration and learning from others who have made the journey establishing home-based or small businesses. Read Metro Farm. Visit metrofarm.com, metrofarm.com.
Bay Federal Credit Union is the local way to bank. For big events and major milestones, experience the most important moments of your life with a financial partner you can trust. Bay Federal will provide you the resources to enjoy a life well-planned and well-lived. If you live or work in Monterey, San Benito, or Santa Cruz counties, you already qualify to become a member. Visit bayfed.com to join us today. Bay Federal Credit Union, making a real difference for our members and community since 1957. Equal housing lender and federally insured by the NCUA.
Good morning and welcome back to Bettina's Buzz. I'm Bettina McBee here on SantaCruzVoice.com. And again with me in studio is Frank Schellace, the beekeeper. So proud to have you here on Bettina's Buzz this morning, Frank. Good morning again.
Thank you so much.
And when we left, I was going to ask you before the break your background in terms of education and learning about the bees and being a beekeeper.
Yeah, so I have that kind of background of seasonal learning with Kew Gardens that I did that was hands-on, almost in an apprenticeship model, but again, kind of like co-decision making. And then also I'm a part of the current Cornell Master Beekeeper cohort. So I'm learning through Cornell as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. And for you, Frank, what are some of the most interesting things you've learned about bees?
One of the most interesting things that I've learned about bees is, so they're very hygienic. They clean out their hive constantly. That's one of the first jobs that a worker bee has, is kind of cleaning. Yeah. And so, that's something that you think about all the time. They're cleaning out dead bodies of bees that have died inside the hives, or detritus, or feces. And one of the things that I learned recently is that a bee, in order to fully develop, I guess, their gut biome, actually has to come into contact with a little bit of feces.
Oh.
Which is so strange.
Yes.
But it's interesting, and it's interesting.
Nature. It's just nature.
It's nature, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a whole different organization and a whole different perception when you get into that, the natural world. But it is interesting because you hear something one way for so long. You hear bees are hygienic, bees will clean the hive, bees will clean the hive. And then 5 years later, you hear bees need to come into contact with feces, right? So that's like something that's interesting to me, is there's always learning opportunities. You'll always learn something new. As long as you don't feel like you already know everything, there's something new to learn.
Exactly. There's always something new to learn. The first time you came in contact with the multitude, a gathering of bees waggling, how does that feel? How did you feel? Is it intimidating?
Yeah, it's intimidating, and it's nice to think about now, because now I can go around a hive with no equipment during the appropriate time of the season, and if I know the temperament of the bees. Whereas, when I started beekeeping, it was intimidating. It was a little bit more of a kind of hang in the back activity, where I was watching from a couple feet away.
Are bees anything like, for example, like they say about dogs, that they can smell fear? So try not to project that type of energy.
I think that the way that you'll kind of transfer that is the way that you move around them and the way that you handle the equipment. If you're like kind of freaking out or shaking or something, and then you try to grab a frame and you're shaking, they'll pick up on that, that vibration that you're...
can agitate them.
Yeah.
Which would agitate me too.
Yeah, for sure. If someone's taking the roof off your home and
Yes.
picking up your furniture.
Starting moving things around.
Yeah.
You've tidied up all day long, and here comes somebody making a mess.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think bees are affectionate at all?
That's a really good question. I think it would be difficult to be affectionate as an insect in general. I think it would be difficult.
You mean they don't come... Frank has a beard, listener. So you mean they don't... Do you get bees in your beard?
I get bees in my hair.
Your hair.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if they get agitated...
Frank's hair is just down to his shoulder.
Yeah, just about shoulder length.
So they get in your hair.
They'll fly right into my hair, which I feel like has saved me from getting stung in the neck a ton of times, because they'll get kind of tangled in your hair, and you can kind of like gently brush them out and then close the hive and leave. But I don't think that they're not affectionate. And people say that they do remember the beekeeper.
I would think so.
Yeah,
they'd go, here comes Frank. Let's dance on over. Here comes Frank. Why not? I don't think so.
And if you're a good beekeeper and you're using methods that are kind to the bees, then, their capacity for memory, their memories of you would be better, and they would be less agitated when you
Plus, you want to be nice to them. Now I've just learned they don't have a very long lifespan.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I thought, but I thought they lived longer than perhaps a year, or less than a year.
Yeah, the queen will live for a few years. Some people have said that she can live up to 8 years. I think that's maybe...
That's because she doesn't have some male bothering her all the time, right? I'm sure that has a lot to do with it, but anyway. And she has all her workers.
Yeah, mm-hmm. And they take care of her. They will, though, as I say that, they will overthrow her.
They will?
Mm-hmm.
They'll mutiny?
They will mutiny. whenever they see fit.
Whenever they see fit?
Yeah.
So it could just be a bad day or for the rest of the hive?
Theoretically, sure. Yeah. A bad day and they all just mutiny.
Or someone wants to relocate and she doesn't want to go. Is she a big part of the relocation, I would assume, when they start doing their dance?
Yeah. So she, at that point, can't fly at that point in the season. So the way that the queen works is that she'll go out and she'll mate with 10 to 20 to more than 20 drones. And
10 to 20?
Yeah.
And that's what they're called, drones?
Yeah, the males are called drones.
Just drones.
Just
a drone.
Just droning about. And so she'll go out and she'll mate with 10 to 20 drones, maybe more, and come back into the hive. And that's kind of at the beginning of her life. And she's kind of so full of this genetic material that her body gets larger, her ovarials swell up, and she can't fly, right? So when they're going to swarm, when they're going to find a new home and leave, she needs to kind of be told by the workers to decrease her egg laying so that her...
Because she's not being protected.
Yeah, and so she needs to be ready to fly. So they basically prepare her to fly by making her lose the weight of all of the egg production activities inside of her.
And then what happens with all the eggs? Is there a group of bees, the nurse bees, who take care of the little eggs?
Yeah, that's exactly what they're called. Yeah, nurse bees.
They're called nurse bees?
Yeah.
How cool.
Yeah, that's part of what's called the caste system within the hive, which means that they're anatomically and morphologically different, the queen and the workers, and also that they will both take part. It's like individuals taking part in brood rearing of brood that is not their own. And so technically the queen has the bulk of the genetic material within the egg, and the workers might only be like 12% related to the egg that she just laid, but they still do all of the care for that egg.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a system.
Yeah. It's a fascinating system.
That is fascinating.
It's called kin selection.
Kin selection?
Yeah, which, I mean, I could rant on about that and ramble on
Go
about
ahead,
that for
rant
a
a
long
little
time.
bit. Go ahead, Frank.
Kin selection is really interesting because I think for a long time people thought that this behavior in bees, it was kind of kindness and it was, duty bound, whatever. But they actually now think that it is just, the worker will be more related to the egg that the queen lays than what the worker could potentially lay if the worker were able to become fertilized, which she's not.
She's not.
She's not.
That was going to be one of my next questions.
Yeah, that's one of the main differences between the worker and the queen is that the queen can mate. And
so is the queen...
fertilized eggs. The workers can lay eggs, but those eggs are not fertilized, and they'll just...
Because it's the queen that flies out and gets all the drones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So those eggs won't be fertilized. Those will just be drones, because drones are the result of unfertilized eggs. And so if you have a colony full of drones who don't do any tasks, don't take part in any of the brood rearing or, comb building or anything, the hive will just die over time. So the queen is the only one who's laying fertile eggs.
And what are bees cannibal? Are they cannibalistic?
That's such an interesting question. That's such
because I'm wondering what those little baby bees
well,
get to eat.
It's funny that it's so funny that you ask that, because when I'm taking notes in the Master Beekeeper course, I am constantly thinking, I never thought that I would have to truly remember how to spell the word cannibalized. And you do when you're writing about bees, because there is a lot of... They're not really cannibalizing each other. They're cannibalizing larvae or eggs that have, it's like a whole thing. So there's a sex determination gene, and if they get two genes that are exactly the same for sex determination, that's not something that the bees want, and so the worker bees will cannibalize those young. And there's a lot of that happening, and
that happens in nature itself a lot, of eating of each other.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to say.
So they're not eating like full grown bees. They're not eating like fully formed other workers. But
just parts that
it's so
yes.
funny that you asked that, because I'm like constantly writing it. I'm like, how do you spell cannibalized? Why am I writing this so much all of a sudden in my life?
So so do people call you up, Mr. Beekeeper, in terms of the qualities of bees, the pollination qualities of bees, and the wonderful things bees do for us? So someone calls you up, someone in the agricultural area of Salinas, discuss that for us, please.
Yeah, so someone called me to remove that colony, and that's something that'll happen frequently throughout the year, because bees will be swarming, they'll be building colonies in places that are not ideal for us. Or
like houses.
Yeah.
My aunt was one time in a house, and there were a colony of bees.
Did they have to cut out the drywall?
I don't know. I just spent the night a couple of nights, but she did have problems at this house with bees. She was at someone's house in Carmel, and there were bees buzzing around.
If they find that perfect cavity, and a part of it is that they want kind of small entrance holes, because the smaller the entrance, the easier to defend against wasps, yellow jackets, things like that. Mm-hmm. Even skunks. One of the things that I learned is that skunks would go to the front of a hive and scratch at the ground. They'd scratch at the ground until a guard bee came out, and then they would eat that bee. And then they would do it again. Oh. Scratch at the ground, and then a bee kind of comes out like, what are you doing? What's going on?
Why would a skunk want to eat a bee?
Yeah, I mean, to each their own.
There's not much meat on a bee, is there? So in terms of, again, the pollen, so you offer your bees to pollinate for people? Is that something you do?
I don't do that. I would be considered, so there's kind of like 3 tiers, I guess, of beekeeper. There's hobbyist / backyard beekeepers, and that's where I would fall.
That's where you are, okay.
Yeah. And then there's sideliners, and sideliners are said to have up to 500 hives. And then there's commercial beekeepers.
And those are the commercial beekeepers.
Commercial beekeepers can have like 12,000 hives.
And they help people with pollination.
Yeah, they do. So they'll get the call, and actually it's really interesting. I just did a workshop with the agricultural entomology class, and I was talking about the almond pollination here in the Central Coast. Mm-hmm. And so there's about 500,000 hives in California that are registered, and that is not even enough to pollinate how many almond trees that there are here. And so 85% of the country's commercial beehives will be drawn into the Central Coast to pollinate just almonds in
just
February.
The almonds.
Mm-hmm. 85, and that's like 1.3 million hives.
That's a lot of...
Yeah. They're coming from like Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, New York. They're driving in, huge trucks all the way across the country to pollinate the almonds.
And I've seen those almond tree groves, and they're absolutely beautiful. And thank God for bees. So how do you help educate people about bees and the importance of bees, Frank?
Yeah, so that's where kind of my tier is. So I would be hobbyist / backyard, and what I'm focused most on is education. And so I have an observation hive that I bring around to schools, libraries, community gardens, all different places. And so the bees are behind glass or plexiglass, and so people can see how they arrange themselves socially, kind of the architecture of the hive. They can watch them build and provision cells. And I've found that that's a really good way to get people close up to the bees.
Yes.
One of the first questions that I ask is, who here has been stung by a bee? And almost everybody will
raises their hands.
Yeah, and then I'll say, okay, how many of you have been stung by a wasp?
And that's when I'd raise my hand. It was a wasp.
Exactly. It's always 90% of the time.
I've never been stung by a bee.
Right, yeah.
A wasp, yes.
And most people, I feel like, have also never been stung by a bee.
But they thought it was a bee?
It's just such a word. I mean, and that's kind of the double-edged sword with bees, is that they've become such a charismatic species, a charismatic genus and species, so that everybody is saying bee. You know, they're applying the word bee to wasps, you know, and in some cases even flies. And one of the things that I want to do during educational events is differentiate between bee and wasp, and, you know, getting people close to kind of hopefully shed that fear of bees. That's a good way to do it, is to have them behind that glass so people can experience them, see that they're working really hard, because at the end of the day, for the most of the season, they're really busy. They're not worried about you.
Yeah, they don't have time to worry about us.
No, they're not coming to sting you for no reason. I mean, they die if they sting you. Why would they want to do
Exactly.
that? It's crazy.
And even in that, so we have to believe that bees are smart enough to know if they sting somebody, they're going to lose their life even sooner. So why do that?
Yeah, and they have this mechanism that they kind of do. I guess you can call it a mechanism. So when I'm at the hives, and if I have a hive open for too long and they're kind of getting agitated, they'll body check me. And so they'll just fly.
You get body checked by a swarm?
It's mostly individuals, so I'll have
But they'll let you know.
Yeah, they'll fly into my face or fly into my body.
So there's ways, obviously, that the bees know how to communicate with you.
Yeah, they're really smart.
And you're smart, too, to understand what they're saying.
Yeah,
so they don't, swarm you, to make it clear. Let's get in Frank's hair. So you're obviously entertained by your colonies of bees. Do you just take a chair out there and just watch them? Well, obviously you do, and study them.
Yeah,
make notes.
There's an important kind of observation to make at the hives, you know, just looking around what's going on outside of the hives. That's almost equally as important to looking inside of the hives. And it's just kind of relaxing to be around them for whatever reason. I don't know. Maybe it's the vibrations.
The flight of the bumblebee. That's it's a soothing sound after a while, hearing them working and buzzing.
And another thing that I've been thinking about recently is that I, probably like a lot of people in the world, I have kind of a lot of anxiety, tied to time, right? And how we perceive time.
Yes.
Kind of as a constraint or something that you have to
Yes, we've got 15 minutes and 54 seconds.
Right, you have to snap to it,
yes.
you know? But, you know, when you're beekeeping, you kind of perceive time in a different way, because you're perceiving time in relationship to their tasks and what they're completing in the hive. And also you have to make a lot of seasonal observations. And so you're thinking about what's in bloom, right? Which is nice. It's like a much nicer way to perceive time than I have to be here at this time and I have to work and I have to do this or whatever.
Exactly,
Instead,
yes.
You're thinking like, okay, the clematis is in bloom. And that's nice. You know, that's comforting to me to know that this is in bloom and this is going to be a source of pollen for my bees.
For your bees.
Or the coastal rosemary is in bloom, which I know is feeding them with nectar. You know, and it's just, I feel like it's a really nice way to reconnect with the natural world.
Yes.
And I spend
a lot of time in my backyard, not with bees. I mean, they're there, I'm sure, but with the birds, different species of birds, jays, crows, doves. They come and feed, and they have their schedule. And, of course, like the bees know with you, Frank, they know a comfortable environment to come in and feed, and I give them seed and they sing, and it's quite soothing.
Yeah. Birds are really great for that too. I was doing a birding tour at the Elkhorn Slough, And the guy there, I believe his name was Steve, was talking about all of kind of, he was talking about time in that way too, of like, these birds are going to be here now, and these birds are going to be here. One of the things that he was talking about, actually, that I really took with me was there were hawks that we saw, and there was 2 hawks, and they were kind of circling, and one dove, and then it came back up. And he said, right now in the season, they've already mated, they have their mate for life, and their young have already left the nest. And so what he was calling this activity was pair bonding. And so they're doing kind of like a mating ritual, but they've already decided that they're going to mate for life. So he was saying it's more of like, dating after your children leave the home.
After your day.
Yeah, just getting
out there.
Yeah, reconnecting with your partner, with your long-term partner. And I thought that was really nice. But again, it was like a seasonal thing. It was a time-based thing, and it's really nice to have that connection to nature and that connection with time, and those 2 things.
It is a beautiful connection to have. And yesterday when we talked, by the way, my friends and listeners here on SantaCruzVoice.com, Frank was really kind. I originally had another guest lined up, and unfortunately, Georgia, if you're listening, Georgia, I hope you feel better. And I look forward to having you on Bettina's Buzz. But Frank was very kind to come in on a day's notice to be with us here this morning. And one thing you did mention when I talked to you was feeding, that you had a feeding schedule with the bees. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so because I caught these bees so late in the season, that was sometime in September, I'll now have to feed them, and I'm feeding them 2-to-1 sugar syrup, and that's just to kind of help them get through the winter, or whatever version of
so
winter
it's a
we have.
particular sugar syrup.
Yeah, and you'll change that throughout the season. So in the spring, you'll feed them a 1-to-1 ratio, and that helps them draw out comb, because that's kind of energetically expensive for them to be able to draw out comb, and they need honey to do that process. And in the fall, you're trying to make sure that they have enough stored to last over winter. And so that's 2-to-1. And it's 2 parts sugar, 1 part water, because when they're putting nectar into the cell and turning it into honey, they're evaporating the water with their wings from the honey. So if it's 2 parts sugar to 1 part water, it's just less water for them to evaporate.
And we were talking about, too, just before the show started, I don't know, have you ever seen Bee Movie?
I haven't. No. I've seen a lot of YouTube clips of every time something happens, I think it's like Bee Movie, and then every time someone says something, they play the Seinfeld theme song, and then it layers.
When you're talking about different work assignments of the bees, I really think of that movie, and it's a real cute movie. And of course, a bee falls in love with a woman, and that they have this beautiful love story. But one thing that stood out to me in the beginning of the movie is they point out the miracle of how a bee can even fly based on its size and the wings. Can you discuss that at all?
Yeah, it's funny because I just saw a video on Instagram that's kind of been circulating of the bees flying in a very clumsy way and kind of crashing into things or whatever. And so just to kind of, I guess, like not debunk that video, but kind of give it some perspective. When a bee is flying and a bee has gone out and foraged for nectar, the nectar is stored in her honey crop. And you can kind of tell, so that's one of the observations that you make outside of the hive, is you can look at the entrance and you can see if the bee is kind of bobbing as it's flying, as opposed to flying straight back into the entrance, you know that she has nectar in her honey crop. And so, when people kind of post about bees being clumsy or bees being this, I'm like, leave them alone. They're full of nectar. They've got, there's a reason that they're bobbing like that.
Up and down. And
yeah.
They're full. So what is another common misconception can you think of that people have about bees?
I think the most important misconception right now is, and it's I don't know if it's controversial to talk about, but that beekeeping is saving the world in some way, right? And I feel like kind of a downer when I bring up things like this, but, honeybees and Apis mellifera, the one that we keep here, is not a native species, right? So there's 20,000 species of bees in the world, and there's close to 4,000 that are native to North America, right? And the honeybee is not one of those. Honeybee is cattle that we brought in from Europe. And so one of the ways that one of the bee researchers, Sarah Kornbluth, puts it is you wouldn't start keeping chickens in response to a decrease in bird species, right? So that is a common misconception that, like, what I'm doing is saving the world or saving the bees or something like that. What I'm doing in my practice is trying to bring around the bees to educate people. And I'll try to do kind of planting events and kind of create habitat and things like that. But, beekeeping as a standalone activity is not saving the bees. And in actuality, in certain places, it can create an uncomfortable situation of competition for native bee species. And that's true in places where there's a lot of monocropping or monocultures, and it could be true in dense urban areas. So I think that's the most common misconception, is that, beekeeping is saving the bees, when in reality, again, they're not a native species. We need to be focused on what we can do for native species. Just focus more time and energy on that. And beekeeping is good when you, again, use it for education, and we have a large agricultural system that's feeding tons of people, and it's based on kind of a European agricultural system. So we've kind of locked ourselves into this kind of system where we need the honeybee. But again, we need to be focused on what we can be doing for bees like squash bees, bees like bumblebees, or, minor bees, things like that.
I'm going to really be focused on bees the rest of the day. I know it. This has been so great. Well, Frank, again, I want to thank you very much for joining me this morning on Bettina's Buzz. And do you have social media if people want to reach out and contact you and have you come show your bees?
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram at traveling.hive.
Traveling.hive.
Yes.
Okay. And again, thank you so much for coming, making the trip. Your bees waiting for you at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you leave the radio on so they could turn your computer on so they could hear you?
I told them you're going to be famous.
You're going to be famous. You're going to be talked about on SantaCruzVoice.com. My daughter Serna, her first Halloween costume was a bee. Serna McBee was a bee, and she was one of the cutest bees I've ever seen. And I do want to say hello to Serna and give a shout out to her. She's in San Bernardino at the Escape Halloween concert. It's an electric music festival there, and she's there with her friends Taisha Leek and Darius and I forgot the other friends, but she's there with Taisha Leek and her buddies, and we hope that you're having a good time there. Have a good time out at the concert. And Frank, when you head back to Marina, what's going to be one of the first things you do for your bees?
First thing I'm going to do is tell them that I was on the radio.
And they're going to say, did you talk about me? Did you talk about me?
So you better say good things about us.
So as far as the city of Marina, how is that keeping? Were there a lot of hoops you had to jump through to have bees?
You have to register your hives. There's not a ton of hoops that you have to go through.
It's not difficult.
Not necessarily, no. I mean, you should talk to friends and neighbors and anyone who's going to be around the hives. And that is something that I did. Talk to people. Are you comfortable? Are you allergic? Things like that. You should always kind of clear it with people first.
How do you know if you're allergic to bees? I always heard that you had to be stung to find out if you're allergic, and that's...
Yeah, and one of the beekeepers that I know in New York developed an allergy. And so that's something that she's dealing with. The more you get stung, either you develop some kind of immunity or you get used to it, or you become more allergic. And she unfortunately became more allergic. She's still beekeeping. She's still doing it.
She's still doing it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's a certain passion, obviously, that comes along with taking care of bees.
Yeah, they're really cool. It's the Island Bee Project, and they were keeping bees on Governor's Island in New York City, and now they keep them in Williamsburg and a couple other places.
Can you tell the difference between one bee to another?
Yeah, actually you can. They kind of lose hair as they age. And so
do they get gray? No, they just lose it.
They actually look more gray when they emerge. They look kind of like whitish. In a way, when they first come out of the cell, and their hair is like almost kind of matted because they're emerging from that cell. And so you can tell the difference there. There was a breed of bees that was bred for like a lighter color so you could see them better. Mm-hmm. They're no longer in stock. They're no longer breeding them. But I found that interesting and weird.
Have you ever dressed up as a bee for Halloween?
As a bee? No. But I will say, and not to kind of out myself as being lazy, but if I am ever in a situation where I don't have a costume, I always just, I put on the beekeeper veil.
You put on the beekeeper thing. Yeah. What's one of the most popular questions children ask you? Can you think of about the bees?
Children get really dark for some reason. I think every time I've talked to children or done a workshop with children, there's one child who asks, what happens if all the bees die? And I kind of look at their parents and I'm like, is this an okay topic? Can we talk about this? And they say, yeah. But one child always asks that, what happens if all the bees die?
Because they're learning how important they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And unfortunately, children, especially in our time, they've lived through a lot of extremely difficult things. So,
yeah.
But we'll always keep them on the positive. The bees will be around. The bees, by the grace, will be with us doing those great things. So, anything else, Frank, that you'd like to add in the last minute we have here on Bettina's Buzz?
I would like to add plants.
What type of plants
Yeah.
should I plant?
A lot of things in the mint family are really good nectar forage for bees. We try to say, always plant native so that you're kind of covering the basis for native bees as well. There's a sunflower bee that I really like to see, so plant sunflowers.
Sunflower bee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. They're not actually called a sunflower bee. I just call them that because you always see them on
They
sunflower.
like sunflowers.
Yeah, they're called, I think they're Melisodes bees. But yeah, so plant those. There's a good book by the Xerces Society that's 100 plants to feed the bees. And that's good. It kind of breaks down like what's native, what's non-native, and what the nectar content is. One plant that I really like is Rattlesnake Master. It's got a cool name.
Rattlesnake.
And it looks cool, so plant that.
That sounds good. So, and do your bees like music? Do you play music for them?
I try to sing softly to them.
You sing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do you sing?
Nothing particular. I just kind of try to like
hum and sing.
Hum and, you keep yourself calm, you keep them calm.
And it gives them another way of recognizing you.
Yeah.
By your sound, by your song. Well, that's wonderful. Well, again, Frank, thank you very, very much for coming and joining us here this morning on SantaCruzVoice.com. Thank you all very much for listening to Bettina's Buzz. I'm Bettina McBee, and I look forward to being with you next Saturday at 11 o'clock. I hope you have a great day. Enjoy.